Well, speaking of people who could distribute movies, I've still yet to catch this one, but that's because it wasn't in my top box office. I only watch the stuff that's in the top box office, Zach.
Right.
Let the people know if they should be leaving the theaters to go support the movie that needs the most support out there, she said.
I mean, I think that it's not necessarily something you need to rush out and see. There's certainly some people who will find a story like this appealing. And I think those people are the ones who probably went out and saw it, because there weren't a lot of other people, as we mentioned. But it's a kind of movie that I don't know if it's gonna be like the Friday night entertainment. This is a little bit more of like it's a little bit more homework, and homework is maybe not the nicest thing to say about a film that's very well made and very effective in terms of communicating the emotional turmoil that was caused by all the Harvey Weinstein scandals. But it's just like, I think the film is such a literal adaptation of the investigation into Harvey Weinstein that they don't really give you a little bit more meat on the bone. There's not enough of the Megan Twohey or Jodie Cantor characters played by Zoe Kazan and Carey Mulligan to feel like you really connect with either of them. There's not necessarily enough of the investigation even. It just sort of, it's doing All the President's Men cosplay well, but it's still kind of like working in that shadow and not kind of doing its own thing. And I don't know. I think it's effective. I don't want to undersell the film too much because it's a good movie, but it's not. Especially when we talk about how many great movies are out right now, it's not one of the must-sees, I think, in theaters.
I feel you. If you check, see, we got on the chat a little cracking on the mic. We'll try to get that fixed in a little bit. But I did have a question in terms of talking about Bob Chapek's removal and this idea of how to manage a movie and releasing it. I don't know if you got to see the Hollywood Reporter article out there, but to recap it for some of the people, there was an article out there dealing with the Hollywood Reporter really coming at this movie for its box office, which to me is some of the goofiest reporting possible. No one's expecting this to do Marvel numbers, right? Second to that was this idea of one of the Hollywood Reporter writers decided to quote tweet and say, if only there was a guy who the movie wasn't trying to get at, who knew how to market independent movies. And that had to be one of the dumbest tweets of the week. But I have to ask you, in a world where, like you said, you have all of these releases out, would this have done better not going to theaters and playing the VOD market?
Well, that's a question. That's a hard question to answer, right? Because it might be even harder to get people to plunk down, $7.99 on a film that hasn't even had like a solid theatrical run to build hype. I think where maybe this movie would have worked best is like on a Hulu, which does a lot of these movies about stories that were ripped from the headlines. Stuff like Dope Sick, which does really well on Hulu.
Yeah. The Assistant, when that premiered on Hulu.
Yeah, right.
Would you say The Assistant's a better version of this in terms of covering the case? I
would too, in that I like The Assistant's approach more, but The Assistant is, a fictional story, and this is trying to tell you the true story. I prefer the more artistic rendering in The Assistant. Like, it's also the fact that this stuff happened so recently that there's no real mystery or surprise in the film. It kind of just it feels like being told the story that you were already told a couple of years ago. And I think that's also part of what removes the sense of urgency that a movie like She Said could really use.
Okay. All right. Well, it is in theaters. We'll see how it does. We'll see how it flips over. But do you see this being something that's going to carry to award season?
I think it might get a couple slots. I could see it picking up a Best Adapted Screenplay award for being adapted from the book, although I don't think the screenplay is necessarily one of its best features. I think there's some hype around Carey Mulligan potentially getting in supporting actress. I could see that, because she's pretty solid in the film. it's not going to be a major awards player. And I think at this point I would be a little bit surprised if it cracked the 10 Best Picture slots.